She's pretty, Daddy. Lena's words, at 7 years old, rang out clear and pure in the stuffy, scorching air of Ridgefall Falls, causing the crowd to fall silent. Men, squinting in the bright sun, dropped their cigars. Women, hiding behind fans and whispering mockingly, froze with their mouths agape. All of them were looking at the massive figure of the bride, whose opulent dress could not hide her impressive frame, and her groom, the cowboy Ethan. The whole town had gathered to mock this marriage of convenience, but one innocent word from a child left them at a loss. Ethan felt nausea rise in his throat. He was 28, but the wrinkles on his forehead and at the corners of his eyes were already permanently etched. His once light hair was sun-bleached, turning into a faded straw color, and his hands, which were perpetually covered in calluses, testified to years of hard labor. He wore the best suit he could afford, but he still looked foreign, constrained, and out of place. He wasn't looking at the bride he didn't want to. His gaze was fixed on the hills he loved, on the ranch he had spent his entire life building. The ranch that was about to fall into Silas Vance's hands. Silas stood in the front row, a little away from the bride, as if he didn't want to be near her. He was dressed in an expensive dark suit, and his silver watch gleamed in the sun. Silas Vance, a man whose gaze was colder than steel and whose smile was more deceitful than a serpent's whisper. It was he, a skillful and ruthless market player, who had backed Ethan into a corner. The ranch was on the brink of bankruptcy, and Vance, like a savior, offered a deal that was impossible to refuse. The debt would be forgiven if Ethan married his cousin Clara. She's a little different from the others, but you'll get your freedom, and I'll get my niece, Vance said. Ethan didn't know what awaited him in this marriage. He only knew one thing: his ranch, his father's legacy, was in danger. This deal was his only chance. He stood before the judge, who seemed tired of this farcical ceremony. Ethan heard the crowd whisper, "Look at her. She's like a bear. Poor thing, he's only marrying her for the land." For the first time since the ceremony began, Ethan looked up. He looked at his future wife. She was incredibly huge. Her arms were thicker than his thighs, and her height made him feel like a small boy. Her hair, braided into a tight plait, was the color of a raven's wing, and her eyes, dark and bottomless, were full of, no, not fear, but resignation. She stood motionless, as if carved from stone, and her face was completely devoid of emotion. But in her eyes, there was some kind of indescribable sadness. She did not resist, did not cry, did not beg. She just stood there. She was as unhappy as he was. And at that moment, looking into her eyes, Ethan felt compassion for her for the first time. He realized that they were both victims of this deal, and he had hoped that maybe he wouldn't be as alone in this life as he had thought. "Ethan," the judge's voice brought him back to reality. "Are you ready to take this woman as your lawful wife?" At that very moment, a deafening, piercing cry, like the shriek of a wounded animal, cut through the air. Everyone turned their heads towards the main street from which the sound came. In clouds of dust rising into the sky, a rider appeared, his horse galloping at full speed, ignoring obstacles in its path. The rider was heading straight for them. It was none other than one of Silas Vance's men, with insane, bulging eyes. He was charging directly at the crowd, and everyone started screaming, realizing that something was wrong. For a moment, Ethan and Clara exchanged glances. A look of horror flashed in her eyes, but she did not back down, her massive hands clenched into fists. The rider's scream was like a madman's wail, his voice breaking into a shriek. He rode straight to the altar, paying no attention to the terrified people scattering to the sides to avoid being trampled. His face, contorted with terror, was covered in dust and sweat. He stopped the horse right in front of Silas Vance and, barely catching his breath, blurted out, They're coming," from the dead man's gullet. "We lost the whole cargo, Silas. Everything's gone." The rider's words, like poison, tainted the hot air. The crowd froze, and then chaos erupted. "Dead man's gullet. That's impossible. No one's been there for 20 years. One of the men shouted. "What did they steal? Gold? Or something else?" Another asked. Women, in a panic, grabbed their children and tried to run away, screaming and pushing. Silas Vance, whose face was always calm, suddenly turned pale. His lips tightened into a thin line, and his eyes, usually cold, flared with a malicious, vengeful fire. He grabbed the rider by the collar, lifting him to his feet, and hissed, "What are you saying, Frank? Tell me, quickly." The rider, breathing heavily, looked at him. They're not people. They're not like people. They're like shadows. They came out of the darkness, and their eyes, they glow. There were so many of them. They just appeared out of thin air and took everything. They didn't leave a single person alive, except for me. I hid behind a rock, and they walked right past me. I swear, Silas, they weren't people." Silas pushed him away, and Frank fell to the ground. Now his gaze was fixed on Clara, his eyes slowly sliding over her huge figure. He looked at her as if she were the key to some kind of puzzle, and then he looked back at Ethan. "So, they're not just legends," he muttered to himself. "They're coming back, and they know we have the gold." Ethan, stunned by what was happening, couldn't understand what was going on. "What gold, Silas? What dead man's gullet? I don't understand." Silas didn't answer. He walked up to Ethan and grabbed his shoulder. His grip was like a steel trap. "You have to leave, now. Take her and go. Get out of here. And don't look back. Go into the desert. They won't find you there." Ethan looked at him, and distrust appeared in his eyes. "Why should I believe you? What's going on? You deceived me." Silas let go of him, and his face was full of malice. "Do you think I wanted this? I thought they were just legends. I thought it was just gold. But it's not. It's a curse. And now they're coming after me. But if you take her, they'll come after you. They'll be looking for her, and you'll be right in their hand. So go, before they get here." Ethan looked at Clara, who stood motionless, showing not a single emotion. There was no fear or horror in her eyes. They were empty, and at that moment, Ethan realized that she knew about this. She knew about the curse. She knew she wasn't just being married off. She knew she was just bait, and all the hope that had appeared in him earlier instantly evaporated, replaced by rage. "You used me," he growled. "You used me to save your own skin." "It doesn't matter," Silas replied. "You can still save yourself. Come on, we need to leave. I have more gold, I hid it. But we need to run before it's too late." Ethan looked at him, and then at Clara. He couldn't figure out what to do. He was furious. He was trapped. He was in danger. But he couldn't just leave. He couldn't leave her. Frank's scream repeated, but this time it was much closer. In the distance, black silhouettes appeared, like shadows moving at an incredible speed. They were approaching. Ethan grabbed Clara's hand and pulled her away from the altar. The crowd, screaming in horror, scattered like a flock of frightened sparrows. The black silhouettes on the horizon no longer seemed like an illusion. They were approaching at a terrifying speed, moving not like people, but like predators hunting prey. Ethan couldn't understand how they were moving so fast, but he knew one thing: they had to leave, and the sooner the better. He was limping, but adrenaline muffled the pain in his wounded leg. Clara, despite her size, moved with surprising ease. She wasn't running, but rather gliding along the ground, making no sound. "Where are we going?" Ethan shouted, out of breath. "To the old mine. It's the only place we can hide," she answered. Her voice was low and deep, but there was no panic in it. They ran. The town was left behind. They sped across the desolate plains, and the black silhouettes seemed to close the distance with every step. Ethan looked at them, and horror appeared in his eyes. They looked like people, but their movements were unnatural. They writhed like snakes and jumped like cats. Their eyes glowed red, and a strange, inhuman howl came from their mouths. They were not bandits. They were something else. "What is that?" Ethan whispered. "They come from the dead man's gullet," Clara answered. "They are shadows born of greed. They are looking for what belongs to them." Ethan felt his rage building. He was furious that Silas Vance had deceived him. He not only forced him to marry a woman he didn't know, but also dragged him into some insane, supernatural story. He should have known. He should have told him everything. Ethan had been used like a pawn in someone else's game, and now he had to pay for it. They reached the mine, and Clara, without losing a second, opened the door, which was secured with a rusty lock. It was dark and damp inside. They entered, and Clara closed the door. In the absolute darkness, Ethan could feel her breathing. He could feel his heart pounding wildly in his chest. He knew they were safe, but he also knew it was only a temporary reprieve. "Why are they looking for you?" he asked. "I'm one of them," she answered, "but not like them. I am different. My family, we were the first ones who found them when they came. My family rejected them, but I couldn't. I betrayed my family, and I have to pay for it. I can't tell you who I am, but I can't lie to you. You have to know what I did." Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. His rage and horror were too strong. He wanted to scream, but his voice wouldn't obey him. He felt trapped, and he realized that his life was ruined. He thought he was marrying a woman who would save him, but in reality, he was marrying a woman who was the cause of all his troubles. At that moment, they heard a sound. It wasn't a roar or a howl. It was a sound that seemed to be a sign. It was like a hammer striking stone. They froze. In the distance, shadows appeared. Their eyes glowed red, and they were approaching. They found us, Ethan whispered. No, Clara answered. They're not looking for us. They're looking for me. Clara took Ethan's hand. Come on, she said. We don't have much time. She pulled him deeper into the mine, and they ran. They ran deeper and deeper until they saw a light. It wasn't sunlight. It was a light that came from the depths. It was a light that beckoned them but also frightened them.